Hey guys, it's Matt Catling here, and welcome to your mini accelerator for the week. I'm excited about this one because it is so powerful. We're talking about patterns of power. This is a real challenge, isn't it? Because we can have limiting patterns that are really running dormant. They're running unconsciously, untethered, and they can really take us out of the game. Like when you increase emotion, you decrease intelligence. And also, the dormant ones, we don't even sometimes know they're there until there is a significant amount of pressure. For example, when COVID hit, all of these patterns started to fire, and that translated into anxiety for some people, burnout, exhaustion, depression, all of those things. Now the challenge is sometimes we think these patterns also are our identity. This is just who I am. But if we look at it, it is actually a program that runs, it gets triggered under certain situations. And as I said, it can really take us out of the game. And so this session is called Patterns of Power, and we want to look at it. We want to look at our authentic power. That is the key, not kind of the inflated high, and then what follows is the deflated low. Authentic power is something that kind of grows consistently as you move into that overwhelmed state. So there are kind of three phases that we go through to unlock authentic power. The first one is wounded self. Wounded self is where, like I mentioned, these limiting patterns or wounds, some people are like, Matt, don't call me wounded. I'm like, okay, limiting patterns. It's where these limiting patterns are running untethered. We don't even know that they are running the ship. The big challenge is that when you make life decisions from your limiting patterns, then technically they're going to often lock you into a situation. Like, for instance, if you make life decisions from fear, you're going to find that fear kind of encases your life. If you make life decisions from guilt, you'll probably not be in the equation. When you're making life decisions from guilt, the deals that you make, you're often overcompensating or overgiving. And you get to that point where, who am I? The challenge with a guilt pattern as well is you'll transfer that guilt also to other people in the form of, initially resentment, all of those things. So we want to look at these limiting patterns. We want to kind of move to a situation where we can observe them. But if you look at the kind of the first step here, most people, 80% of the population, they're unconscious that these limiting patterns are really shaping their life and controlling every decision. And the challenge is, if you make life decisions from these wounded patterns or these limiting patterns, you will repeat them until the crises get so big that you wake up out of the trance of these patterns. Now, a lot of people jump into personal development, which is great. And then what happens is you start to look at, the opposite of these wounds. And you start to look at the next phase, which is best version of self. Now, the challenge with best version of self is that it's a really great thing to start focusing on what you want. You start to uncover, what's the opposite of these limiting patterns, i.e. patterns of power. But it can set up, as you can see, almost like a war between the two. You can see wounded self and best version of self. The focus is self. And this is where we can be in a situation where it's, I'm only good if I'm my best version. If I'm stuck in a wound or whatever it is, I'm terrible. And that creates a war inside. Now, the old models of personal development actually did that. They created a war. And you used to go in kind of looking at the world and thinking, oh my God, I need to work harder. I need to push harder. I'm not good enough. All of those things. Now, the challenge is that the world is getting faster. And so this structure doesn't really work anymore. In fact, this structure causes burnout. And if you think about it, that's what a war does. A war takes casualties, it takes energy, it impacts, right? Impacts other people as well. Whereas if we look at the opposite polarity, and this happens when you kind of fuse wounded self and best version of self, the fusion of the two moves to the polarity of others. And from a place, which is really interesting, more of a peaceful place, more of a natural place. And what I mean by that is that if you think of the things that you love in life, right, you're naturally disciplined. There's no effort or energy. There's no exhaustion. There's no emotional leakage. And that's kind of where we want to be. Mission is, and you may want to write this down if you're taking notes at the moment, mission is more that overflow state. It's where we're able to achieve more with less. Burnout becomes a thing of the past. And what happens is that we've got access to the opposite polarity of the pattern. So for instance, if you've been running on a pattern of fear or anxiety, then that's going to drain you, because we're not meant to be stuck in fear. It's only meant to be a really quick thing. It's going to drain you, but also it's going to potentially cause a state of disease. But if we look at the opposite is where you kind of feel safe inside, you feel certain within. And with that, it manifests in kind of like those courageous decisions. The opposite of kind of anxiety is more excitement. Anxiety is the habitual process of thinking of the worst case scenario in the future. Whereas if we look at excitement or inspiration is where I'm excited for the future. Each of them have a different polarity. And that's what we're looking for when it comes to patterns of power, is a different polarity. Okay. So the overflow state is really interesting, because imagine this: you've got your health right and you are overflowing with energy. And that's why we run our program Ultimate Life Recharge, because we need to be systematically recharging the energy centers. So now imagine you've cleaned up all of the relationships from the past, and you see them, you've used conflict. You can now see the magic of conflict and the benefits of that to be able to evolve and shift consciousness. So imagine that you can look at the past and you can just feel total unconditional love with every single relationship. Well, if you can do that, if you can move to that position, and there's a bit of emotional work to be able to achieve that, then suddenly you're free. You're free to be able to bring that into present time. And then if we look at the wealth area of life, a big stressor for people, imagine being able to kind of shift all of those limiting patterns around wealth, be in present time, and really look at the world in a way that is really exciting, where there are no shortages. There is just an abundance of opportunity, almost like a little child that is in a playground that's really, really excited. Imagine being in a situation where you could look at the world and play the game of wealth in that state. And that's really what I help my troublemakers do, right? Because it's just about getting into new playgrounds, doing bigger deals, making an impact. And so when we handle those basic stresses, what happens is that we create space for that kind of mission state. And what you'll find is the mission, when it comes to service of others, is really helping people that are at that first step, which is wounded self, because wounds become superpowers. Growth and contribution work hand in hand. And the more we grow personally, the more we actually want to contribute. And if we can look at that polarity, that's when we kind of move to that authentic power. You can plonk a business on top, and then suddenly, you're not going to burn out. The team's not going to burn out. And this is what we call the rise of the authentic leader. So how do we do it? How do we move from kind of wounded self to best version of self and then to mission? Well, we've got to shift these limiting patterns, and we've got to turn them into patterns of power. So what I've done is I've given you the questions out of my book, Problems to Power. And this is how we can look at an area of life, or we can choose an area of life, and then we can look at the thing that you're avoiding, because the thing that you're avoiding indicates a war. Okay. And now remember, if we go back a slide, the war is this one: the war between wounded self and best version of self. Now, when there's a war happening here, enormous amounts of energy is being lost or leaked. So we want to shift that so that we get the opposite polarity, and then move to that overflow state and get the clarity of a mission. So this is what we do. We look at the war. Okay. And the easiest way is to look at what you're avoiding. So you could choose an area of life that you are avoiding. It might be it's your health, or an aspect of your health that you're avoiding at all costs. You do not want to look at it. Or it might be the wealth area. And remember, the wealth area, there's a number of areas that we can look at. One is your relationship to money, so more the mindset side. The next one might be the business side, business or career, or it might be a property strategy, or it might be a share strategy. But we can look at what are you avoiding underneath that. And then we go into these questions. These questions are what we call meta model questions in NLP. So the first one is that we choose the area of life that you're avoiding, or a belief system that's in limitation. And then we ask the question, what is the problem? Now, what we're doing with that question is that we're gathering more information, because when someone says, oh, well, I've got this problem, that's where they stay. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. So when we ask the question, well, what is the problem? We're getting more detail. Then what we want to look at is the timeline. So we'll ask the question, how long has it been a problem? And for some people, these limiting patterns have been with them for so long, they think it's an identities. So you might, if someone says to you, oh, it's been with me forever, well, that's not the case. You'll want to ask the question, well, actually, how long has it been? Which then leads into the next question, which is, can you remember the first time this problem occurred? How old were you? It's very interesting when you put a numeric to it, it almost unlocks the memory. And now, if you're in a blank spot or if you're constantly saying, I don't know, challenge that, because the I don't know is typically a defense mechanism that can really hold you back, right? Because the defense mechanism typically is in place because if we did know, we'd have to change. So let go of the I don't know, go through the blank spot and notice new information coming to the surface. I often say to people is if we look at intuition and we break it into two words, intuition, well, what does that actually mean? The inside tutor or the inside teacher, right? And it's typically the first thing that pops up. So imagine you started to listen to the first intuitive response before we get in and start analyzing it. So yeah, we moved to, can you remember the first time where this problem occurred? How old were you? Now, a lot of patterns are connected to relationships. So then we ask the question, who was involved? And then we look at them holistically, and do they have a similar problem? How long they had that problem for? And then we move into a learning state, which is, what could we learn to let go of this problem? And then we do a reframe. How is this problem actually helping you grow? See, people think they shouldn't have problems. This is the thing. But what if the problem or the wound is the key? It's a thing that gets you out of the trance of it. You know, the crisis wakes us up. We start to look at the world differently. We start to ask different questions, and we start to shift consciousness and move in different directions. So these questions are really, really powerful to help you turn limiting patterns into patterns of power. So guys, that is my mini accelerator for you today. If you have any questions or you need any help, as always, please reach out, support@yourfutureevents.com.au, or connect with me on Facebook. If you'd like me to run through this process with you personally, it's so good when you do it with an expert in rapid change. You obviously get the breakthroughs at a higher level. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this session today, and I'll see you in the next mini accelerator. Bye for now.